Disappointment. It's a word that everybody knows and nobody loves. It's that feeling you get when you open up a new pack of Tidy Whities from your grandparents on Christmas, or when you make that drive all the way out to your favorite restaurant only to find out that it's closed. Well, it's 'cause it's Monday, you moron. Or how about that time that you've been sold on a game since it was first announced from a teaser at E3 a few years back, but when it released it just didn't deliver anything close to what was promised. On today's episode of the Mega Man Cave, we're looking into the world of disappointing games. These are the titles that were supposed to be revolutionary, supposed to be something that literally blew your socks off, but ended up existing only as a proverbial dumpster fire that was left to die at the pitchforks of reviewers around the world. Whether it was a game that didn't deliver what fans were promised, a buggy mess, or an all-around crap stain, all of these games are tied together in gamers' minds. These are the games that we love to hate, and hate them we do. But out of all the underwhelming titles I have ever come across in my gaming career, which one reigns supreme as the turd among all turds? The steaming pile of lackluster to rule them all? Well, join me as I weed through the insignificant to uncover the most disappointing game of all time. You know, it's kind of funny. I wanted to look for a good starting point in this video with a retro game that had me disappointed when it came out. Ironically, I had trouble with this. No, it's not because my memory sucks and I can't recall thoughts from when I was a young lad. I think it's honestly because of the way game press coverage is handled these days. Back in the 90s, there weren't a lot of games that received multiple gameplay footage reels prior to launch. Don't get me wrong, the hype I felt for these games back then were the highest I've ever experienced, but there weren't many instances of me being left disappointed. Perhaps it was the fact that my wallet didn't permit it, perhaps it was the lack of social media to feed on or help propagate my dissatisfaction. Whatever the case, I was grateful for a lot of the games I rented or bought back in the NES or SNES era. There are some titles that I revisited, such as Demon's Crest, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, and Secret of Mana, that I just don't get or thought were overrated, but that may have been more personal taste than they were actual bad games. However, there was that one N64 title that left a bad taste in everyone's mouth. Daikatana, the brainchild of the first-person shooter royalty John Romero himself, was hyped up beyond belief. When it was finally released in 2000, it quickly vaulted to the top of many gamers' disappointing lists. I mean, it's John friggin' Romero, as the creative mind behind the game. How could anything go wrong? Although certain gaming publications seemed to plaster glowing reviews of the game on pages of their magazines, once the street date broke for the title, it wasn't long for the facade to fade away. Horrible graphics, mediocre combat, and a horrendous story and characters haunted the game from the very beginning. Perhaps worse was the game's initial reception was the hard-headedness on behalf of Romero himself. You could almost label this more of a vanity project than anything. Rumor had it that the game was constantly delayed due to choices Romero himself didn't want to let go. The game became an instant disaster and one that is widely known for its flop to this day. The 64-bit era had some other worthy titles, including Conker's Bad Fur Day, Mega Man 64, or the instantly forgettable Quest 64. Wow, an RPG on the Nintendo 64 that actually exists? But is it good? Released in 1998 in North America by none other than video game destroyer THQ, Quest 64 is a generically straightforward RPG where you progress from town to town, battling villain A or B, then progressing to the next area, and so on. It was evident from the start that this game was geared toward Westerners. Heck, it's mind-blowing that Konami actually took the time to release this in Japan the following year. The game got mixed reviews. Some praised its believable graphics, while others complained about how generic it was. However, for a young boy who didn't own a PS1 growing up, the RPG drought I had experienced after the SNES was unreal, and it looked like Quest was the cure for the itch. But holy cow, was this game boring! Battles lacked variety, the graphics were bland, and the story was as cookie cutter as you could get. You are the hero! Go save everyone using hero stuff! Possibly the most unbelievable part was that the series, if you could even call it that, had future releases on the Game Boy Color, such as Quest, Brian's Journey, and Quest Fantasy Challenge. Brian for Smash, anybody? There was also all the Sony children of the generation that got hyped for Tomorrow Never Dies. Finally, GoldenEye on the PS1! Spoiler alert, this was not GoldenEye for the PS1. It wasn't even close. The GameCube, Xbox, and PS2 era ushered in some of the most memorable games of my childhood. Being a middle schooler, there weren't many memories more impactful or fond of than staying up all night with my friends slurping Mountain Dew and eating pizza rolls while blowing each other away in Halo, or seeing how much havoc we could wreak in GTA 3. However, this was also the console generation that produced some real duds. Like, imagine being me, hyped for a game like The Bouncer. Yeah, what was I thinking? Another game that instantly comes to mind that may upset some people is Final Fantasy XII. Yes, I'm going to be that guy here. In a series that was honestly on a roll since 7, I pre-ordered 12 without so much as a second thought. However, I really wasn't impressed by the battle system or the story, two of the most integral parts of an RPG. Back in the early 2000s, we all knew The Matrix was going to be turned into a video game at some point. I, of course, being the uneducated child I was back in the day, received Atari's Enter the Matrix for Christmas in the year 2003. This may have been actually worse than the tighty-whities in a gift status. Horribly bland visuals and generic combat really fell flat for me and lots of others out there. Also, this was one of the first instances I had experienced with game-breaking glitches that were present on a finished game. Hey, at least we got to see two girls kiss, am I right? And don't even get me started on Suikoden 4. Microsoft and Nintendo certainly weren't immune from the realm of disappointment. Remember the beloved Dino Crisis games from the PS1 and Dreamcast? I had many fond memories of playing this series as a kid. Naturally, I wanted to see a title in the 6th generation. And oh my god, what is this burning with fire? Oh god. Sony had Wipeout, Nintendo had F-Zero, so naturally to keep pace with its adversaries, Xbox created Pulse Racer, a game with the graphics of the N64 that employed one of the worst game mechanics ever. If you boost too much, your driver has a heart attack and dies. Great for the kids! Slow down, Grandpa, you don't want to drive yourself into cardiac arrest. Disney's Magical Mirror starring Mickey Mouse. Huh? There was so much advertising for this game, it had to be good, right? I mean, so good they had to specifically remind you in the game's title that it's starring Mickey Mouse. I mean, imagine if any other game did this. Super Mario Sunshine, starring Super Mario. Halo 3, starring Master Chief. Devil May Cry 2, starring Dante. Yes, this game just didn't do it for me. Overhyped by everyone and their mother. The last game of the generation to note as overrated to me was Tales of Symphonia. Now, I was originally drawn in by the unique anime art style and co-op multiplayer for an RPG, but man oh man, this game missed the mark. A dull story and repetitive battle mechanics made this one of my least memorable GameCube experiences. How about a non-console game laden with disappointment? Star Wars Galaxies. This was every Star Wars fan's dream. You mean I can travel through space playing an MMORPG as a real Jedi? Man, sign me up! Although the game was critically praised at launch, the frustration of trying to play as a Jedi mixed with the spotty online presence made this game's charm fade fast for me. Perhaps it was a bit too early for a game with this much weight. As we further our conversation into the 7th and 8th generations, the amount of disappointing games seems to increase exponentially. The first place to start would be one of the most widely known disappointments in video games, Sonic 06. Man, what a better way to usher in a new generation of consoles than to showcase a new Sonic game. Possibly the worst part of Sonic 06 was the level of hype it carried following E3 2006 when multiple outlets were singing its praises. Imagine, a 3D Sonic game with stunning visuals and fast-paced, unique game mechanics to boot? Oh, but that's not what we got. Not even a little bit. We all know the train wreck that this game came to be. Terrible load times, broken level design, redundant combat, and bugs out the wazoo. A game destined for greatness engulfed in flames. The 7th gen also produced some other overhyped disasters. Duke Nukem Forever, A game that was in development for, well, forever, or at least over a decade, and multiple game engines ended up being nothing more than a failed reboot of a dying franchise with cheesy dialogue and graphics and controls years behind its time. With all the resounding success of Perfect Dark on the N64, there was only a matter of time before a sequel or spiritual successor was released. However, the issues with the licensing of Rare proved too much for the series to withstand. This was made evident by Perfect Dark Zero's launch with the Xbox 360. This game just failed on all levels. Star Wars games have garnered their fair share of disappointment over the years as well, but the 7th gen proved fatal on so many levels. The Force Unleashed was honestly a pretty decent game when it came out, with an unnamed Jedi protagonist hurling force waves at countless enemies, but man, was it too short. On top of that was the fact that it got a sequel, which I beat in 5 hours. How do you make a game and charge $60 to poor schmucks like me, then build a mainline story that takes 5 hours? I completed it in one sitting, for crying out loud. It was so bad that they made a DS version, and I can assuredly say it's one of the worst DS games I have ever played, and there's a lot of those. And don't even get me started on Star Wars Kinect. I was wary of this game ever since I first saw it in action during the E3 presentation. However, the fact that the Kinect had the ability to potentially mimic lightsaber mastery of a real-life Jedi, against my better judgment, I ordered a Kinect just for this game. And when I finally popped it in, holy cow, was it ever broken! The sensor was utterly non-responsive, so much that I actually took my Kinect back to GameStop to exchange it because I thought it was broken. How silly I looked when I brought the second one back to my apartment only to discover that I had been duped on a master level. Not even the music portion of this game was redeemable. In fact, I didn't think there was a way to make me hate the Holla Back Girl song more than adding the cheesiest Jedi flair possible to it. Too Human, Bomberman Act Zero, Medal of Honor, Aliens, Colonial Marines, Rock Revolution, Metroid Other M, the GoldenEye remake, the list goes on and on for disappointment in the 7th generation. Despite all the disappointment I experienced over this console generation, there were actually games that I initially chalked up as disappointing that I actually grew to like with time. Fallout New Vegas was a buggy mess when it came out, and I uncovered a few game-breaking glitches along the way that made game progression impossible. Like, I think one time I was stuck between rocks and I was autosaving right when I went into the rocks and I couldn't do anything. The game was broken. However, after I took a break from the game, it seemed the Obsidian-led project cleaned up its act and became my favorite Fallout game of all time. Final Fantasy XIII was also another example of this. It was undeniably difficult to avoid the insurmountable level of negativity surrounding the game's linearity when it released. People were certainly not pleased, but I stuck with it and ended up enjoying it more than most people did. Into the current generation we go, and loads of disappointment still exists. In fact, one could argue that we live in a world where not a single game could come out that people wouldn't bash with every fiber of their being. Like, there's people out there that don't like The Last of Us, God of War, or Breath of the Wild. Despite all the negativity, there are definitely some games that we can all agree did not live up to expectations. Destiny, one of the first major games to come out on the 8th gen consoles, had the Bungie name tied to it, instantly raising the hype factor. However, when it came out, it was honestly underwhelming to me. Considering the game promised so much and provided so much less, caused outrage amongst early consumers. I will say that the game had certainly improved with time. The bad taste really never went away from me though. Evolved, another early PS4 game, certainly looked promising. An almost Left 4 Dead style game, however, when the game was finally released, it faded into repetition and obscurity. Mighty No. 9 was a game near and dear to my heart. Ever since Keiji Inafune's name was attached to it, I was hooked. I had my blinders on from the start with this one though, and I tried to keep away and block out as many possible reviews and spoilers and play it for myself. How could one of the most successful gaming Kickstarters of all time, headed up by my second favorite video game mastermind of all time, flop so ungloriously? It was like living in a nightmare, and it honestly made me think that Mega Man itself would never see a rebirth in the future. No Man's Sky was a title that promised the world to gamers as well, far and wide, ushering in an ambitious and never-before-seen game idea where you could literally explore randomized planets where no single destination would be the same as the next. When it finally came out, well, it looked like this. So, we've covered dozens of games in this video, but there is one game that rises above the rest in the name of disappointment. The one game that promised so much to me that literally had me salivating at the possibilities, only to douse my hopes and dreams in gasoline and set the whole world on fire. Gamers, I present to you Fallout 76. Never in my life had I been ever so disgruntled with a game, to the point where I actually canceled a Let's Play channel I made because it frustrated my life beyond belief. There are too many videos to count out on YouTube chronicling the Bethesda debacle and exactly what went wrong, so I won't beat a dead horse here. Be sure to check out one of these when you have the time. The game was almost unplayable at launch and destroyed every bit of trust I had in Bethesda to create a Fallout game in the future. It was a literal dumpster fire and one that will live forever ingrained in my brain as the most disappointing of all time. So, what do you say? What is the most disappointing game you've ever played? Please leave it in the comments below. If you made it this far, I thank you and please consider subscribing, obliterating the heck out of the like button and bell, it really helps out the channel. As always, this is Kevin signing out from the Mega Man Cave. Happy spelunking.